Imagine a punishment worse than execution. Rome had one. It didn't just kill you, it declared that you had never existed at all. Your name was chiseled off every monument. Your face was hacked from every statue, or the marble recut into someone else's. Your image was scraped from paintings, your coins melted down and struck again. Your birthday struck from the calendar, your very name made illegal to speak or write. The goal was total, not to punish a life, but to delete it from the record of the human race as if the person had been unwritten. The Romans had a name for this sentence of oblivion, and they used it against emperors, empresses, and traitors alike. This is a story of how the most powerful civilization in the ancient world turned forgetting into an official weapon of the state, and how, again and again, it failed in the most poetic way imaginable. To understand why erasing someone was such a devastating punishment, you have to understand how completely the Romans built their world around the idea of being remembered. For a Roman of the ruling class, memory was not a sentiment. It was the entire point of a life. A man of ambition lived for his reputation, his fama, the glory and the name he would leave behind after death. The Romans built their whole moral universe around the conviction that a great person achieves a kind of immortality through being remembered, through statues raised in public squares, through inscriptions carved deep in stone so they would outlast the flesh, through the honored wax images of ancestors displayed in the halls of the family home and carried in solemn procession at every funeral. To a Roman, these were not vanity, they were the mechanism of survival beyond death. As long as your name was spoken, your image displayed, your deeds inscribed, you continued, in a real sense, to exist within the living community of the city. Now flip that logic over. If being remembered is immortality, then being forgotten, deliberately, officially, systematically, forever, is a second death, and a far more terrible one than the first. This is the insight that made Rome's ultimate sanction so uniquely, exquisitely cruel. The punishment that historians now describe with the Latin phrase damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, attacked the one thing a Roman valued even above life itself, the guarantee of being remembered. It was engineered to reach beyond the grave and unmake the person entirely, so that they were not merely dead but had never truly lived, never held office, never won honors, never existed to be mourned or spoken of at all. It was the darkest possible weapon a memory-worshipping civilization could invent. Its own deepest value, turned inside out and aimed at a human soul. So how do you actually delete a person from an entire empire? The Romans worked out the answer in painstaking, physical, almost obsessive detail. When the sentence was imposed, often decreed by the Senate against a disgraced emperor after his death, or against a fallen official, conspirator, or traitor, a systematic campaign of erasure was set in motion across the Roman world, from the capital to the furthest provinces. The condemned person's name was physically chiseled out of public inscriptions, and this is not a theory, you can still see it today. If you visit surviving Roman monuments and read their inscriptions, you can find the scars with your own eyes. Lines of beautifully carved letters with a name violently gouged out, leaving a rough, empty gap where a human being used to be commemorated. Sometimes the erasure is so deliberate and so visible that the blank space seems to shout louder than the name ever could have. Statues and portraits were attacked with the same thoroughness. Some were smashed, toppled, and thrown into the river. But the Romans, ever practical, often did something even more chilling than destruction. They recarved. A skilled sculptor would rework the face of the condemned into the features of a different, approved person. A legitimate emperor, a favored successor. The body, the pose, the honorific stance all remained. Only the identity was surgically cut away and replaced. Some surviving Roman portrait busts are known to have been reworked in exactly this way. One ruler's face carved down into another's. The disgraced individual didn't merely vanish. They were overwritten, their own monument repurposed to glorify the very person who had condemned them. The campaign reached into every corner of public life. Coins bearing the condemned ruler's portrait could be called in and melted down and struck anew. Their name was struck from official documents and public records. Painted images were scraped or smeared away, and there survives at least one famous painted family portrait from Roman Egypt, in which one figure's face has been deliberately obliterated into a blank smear, a person erased from their own family group with a wipe of the hand while the others look calmly on. In the most complete cases, it became forbidden even to speak or write the condemned person's name, and the days associated with them, even their birthday, could be struck from the calendar and declared unlucky. Every trace, in stone, in bronze, in paint, in parchment, in speech, in time itself, was to be hunted down and eliminated. This was not a rare or symbolic gesture. Rome deployed it against some of the most powerful people who ever lived, and the specific cases show exactly how it worked. Consider the emperor remembered as a paranoid tyrant, whose reign ended in assassination. After his death, the Senate is recorded as having fallen upon his memory with something close to glee, decreeing that his images be torn down, his inscriptions erased, and his name removed, so that all trace of him would be wiped from public view. The very enthusiasm of the erasure tells you how much hatred had built up under his rule. Or consider one of the most chilling family cases in all of Roman history. When one emperor died, he left the throne jointly to his two sons, who despised each other. One brother soon had the other murdered, and then imposed the condemnation of memory upon him, ordering his dead brother's name and image erased across the empire. On a surviving painted portrait of the imperial family, you can still see the result: the face of the murdered brother scratched completely out of the family picture, leaving a blank void beside his parents and his killer. A brother did not merely kill his brother, he tried to erase him from the family, from the record, from history itself. It is one of the most human and most terrible applications of the whole practice. Sibling rivalry escalated to the annihilation of memory. The list runs long. Emperors remembered as monsters. Fallen imperial favorites who had climbed too high and were destroyed overnight. Empresses caught in scandal or conspiracy. To be condemned to oblivion was the state's way of declaring that a person had so disgraced the office, the family, or the community that they had forfeited not just their power in their life, but their place in human memory for all time. It was the harshest verdict Rome could pronounce. And now the great irony at the center of the whole story, because the condemnation of memory almost never actually worked, and in a sense it could not. Think about what total erasure would truly require. You would have to find and destroy every single inscription, every coin, every statue, every document, every private portrait bearing this person, scattered across an empire that stretched from the reign of Britain to the deserts of the Euphrates, and you would have to do it so perfectly that no one would ever suspect anything had been removed. That is essentially impossible, and the Romans in practice did not even try to make it perfect. Very often the erasure was meant to be seen. A gouged out name on a triumphal arch in the heart of the city was not a failure of the process, it was the process. The whole population was supposed to walk past that violent gap and understand precisely who had once been named there, and what had been done to them and why. Which means the punishment quietly defeated its own stated purpose. Instead of erasing the person, the visible act of erasure broadcast them. The scar in the stone became a monument to the very memory it was supposed to destroy. Everyone who saw the blank space knew a name had been there, knew it had been torn out, and knew what that meant. Far from forgetting, they were being loudly and permanently reminded. The condemned were, in a strange way, immortalized by the very attempt to annihilate them, their disgrace preserved forever in the eloquent shape of an absence. And here's the final irony, the one that should make us smile a little across 2,000 years. The very fact that we can sit here and discuss the concept of Damnatio Memoriae at all is proof of how completely it failed. We know the names of many of the people Rome tried to erase. We can read their histories. We can stand before their recut statues and their gouged inscriptions and their scratched out portraits. The empire that set out to delete these people from history instead handed them, unintentionally, a strange and permanent place within it, remembered not in spite of the erasure, but partly because of it. The scar outlived the name it was meant to remove, and then it outlived the empire that carved it. Rome did not invent this impulse, and it did not die with Rome. The urge to control memory, to decide who is remembered and who is unwritten, is one of the oldest and most persistent tools of power there is. Long before Rome, the pharaohs of Egypt had done something similar. When a powerful female pharaoh died, her successor is thought to have set about erasing her from the monuments, chiseling out her images and her name, attempting to write her out of the official record of kings, so that the line of succession would seem to pass cleanly around her, as if she had never reigned. Another pharaoh, who had tried to overturn Egypt's traditional gods, was himself subjected to a furious erasure after his death, his monuments dismantled, his name omitted from the official lists, his revolutionary city abandoned to the sand. The ambition was the same as Rome's, not merely to defeat a rival, but to unmake them, and the tool never really disappeared. Every time a later regime has toppled the predecessor's statues, renamed a city to strip away a hated name, or scrubbed a fallen figure out of official photographs so that the public record shows only a smooth and approved version of the past, they have reached for exactly the instrument Rome formalized: the belief that whoever controls memory controls truth, and that a person can be defeated most completely by being forgotten. The Romans were among the first to build this impulse into the machinery of the state and give it a name. They were also among the first to discover its permanent weakness: that memory, once a thing has been noticed, is far harder to kill than a body, and that the effort to erase almost always leaves the loudest mark of all. There is a deeper reason the Romans reached for this weapon so readily, and it says something uncomfortable about power in every age. A ruler who merely kills an enemy admits that the enemy existed, mattered, and had to be dealt with. A ruler who erases an enemy is making a far grander and more insecure claim: that they alone control the story, that they can reach back into the past and rewrite it. that reality itself bends to the will of whoever holds the chisel. It is the fantasy of total control, and its very extravagance betrays the fear underneath it. You do not need to erase what does not threaten you. The Senate that so gleefully gouged out a dead tyrant's name was not calm and secure. It was terrified of what that name still represented, and desperate to prove the terror was over. Every act of erasure is, secretly, a confession of how much power the erased thing still held. The blank space on the arch is not the mark of the winner's confidence. It is the mark of the winner's anxiety, frozen in stone for all time. And consider what this means for how we read the Roman record itself. Every gouged inscription, every recut portrait, every scratched-out face is not just evidence of a punishment. It is evidence of a fear, and fear is one of the most honest things a society ever leaves behind. When we walk through a museum today and see a Roman bust whose features seem subtly wrong, recut from someone else, or an inscription with a violent gap in the middle of a name, we are looking at a fossilized moment of political terror, the instant a regime decided that a particular human being was so dangerous, even in death, even as a memory, that they had to be unmade. The erasers thought they were closing the book on their enemies. Instead, they were writing, in the most permanent medium they had, a confession of exactly who frightened them and how much. 2,000 years later, we can read that confession as clearly as any inscription they meant to preserve. The blank space speaks. It always did. Rome invented a punishment worse than death, the sentence of being erased from existence. Your name gouged from stone, your face recut into a stranger's, your image scratched from your own family portrait, your very memory outlawed. It was the darkest possible expression of a civilization that believed being remembered was the only true immortality, and it failed over and over in the most poetic way imaginable, because the scar left by the erasure became its own kind of monument. And the empire that tried to make these people vanish is the very reason we can still name them today. There's a strange, stubborn hope buried in that blank space on the Roman arch. The truth of a human life resists deletion and does not erase cleanly. If you want more history that someone once tried very hard to bury, subscribe. That is the whole idea of this channel. We go looking for the gouged out names because the attempt to erase something always leaves a mark, and the mark is exactly where the real story begins.